Recording now. Looks like we're recording. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. I'm Sean, and I'll be moderating today's SIG CLI bi-weekly meeting. It looks like we have a pretty full agenda, so I'm going to try to move through these items as quickly as possible. The only announcement we have currently is that to remind us that our code freeze is at the end of March. On March 29th, the enhancement freeze has already passed. And so does anybody else have any other announcements? So why don't we move on to introductions? So I'm curious if there's anybody who is new or hasn't been here for a while who'd like to introduce themselves to the SIG CLI. Most of the faces I see are pretty, or ones that I know. Is there anyone else who would like to introduce themselves? Okay, looks like. Okay, why don't we move on to the topics? So I put, Eddie, I hope you don't mind, I put your topic about the reviewing the annual report first, just to make sure we got to that. Are you ready to go over that item?
Yeah, we can just talk through that. So Maciek and Katrina and I got together yesterday to...
Is someone speaking? Because I can't hear.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear Eddie just fine.
Okay.
Okay. Just 1 second. I think I can't hear. I think maybe my settings.
You can hear Sean? All right, I'll just start and Sean can sort his audio out. So we got together yesterday. So the annual report is something that all the SIGs prepare, and this all goes into the projects, kind of like State of the Union for the past year, as well as the CNCF provides an update. So we can share the one from last year if anyone's interested. It was public. And so we have a kind of a template that we just need to work through here. We got together and we filled in a bunch of stuff. The ask from the rest of the SIG is any shout outs, highlights, work we missed. Please just take a look at this doc. It should be open for everyone to edit and contribute to. So feel free to toss any comments or anything you have on here. And yeah, we want to make sure everyone's work is highlighted and any of our needs and other bits are tracked. So I think the subs project specifically, Nick, we could probably use some info on CUI about here, including the work you're done. I put a shout out at the top there to thank IBM for donating the repo originally.
Okay, thanks. I'll do that.
Cool. Any other thoughts on this, Maciej or Katrina? This is due February 14th. Well, actually, no, we have to open the initial PR February 14th. So we still have some leeway from when this is open, but this was our first pass. So, yep, feel free to go ahead. Sorry.
I thought that it's until the end of the month.
I think the initial PR has to be open on the 14th.
Oh, yeah, it might be that the initial PR, and then there's time to get it merged in March, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we can iterate it. So this definitely isn't final, but yep, this should be open. So feel free, everyone, to toss stuff on here and make sure everyone's work is highlighted and your needs are highlighted as well. Sean, do you have audio yet? Okay, looks like not. All right, so next up we have Alex. Did we do intros? Did we skip over intros? Anyone on the call that hasn't been here before that would like to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'll introduce myself since I'll be presenting right now. Yeah, I work with Sean, so I hadn't introduced myself earlier. I work with the Kubernetes kernel team at Google, in the API expressions working group. And yeah, I'm here to talk about a proposal to extend kubectl explain with a new output type. Should I share my screen to show that document, or I'm not sure the protocol here?
Yes, I will make you a co-host. No, I can't, because Sean is the host. I can take host from Sean. Let's hope Sean sees that. And I guess you just want to talk through what's on my screen.
Yeah, that's fine. It's actually it's fine to be scrolled down to the kubectl explain UX section. I think we can just stare at that. Yeah, so my team has been approached by a number of other teams for advice on how they can automatically generate documentation for their Kubernetes clusters. And unfortunately, we never have a really good answer for them. And we looked around at what's available in the community, and we found that there's a couple of options, but they all seem to be made not with everybody in mind. Some of them generate HTML. They might only include Kubernetes core types. They don't allow you to have your own custom formatting, or they use OpenAPI v2. So we wanted something that checked all of these boxes. And we built a prototype using OpenAPI v3, and we looked at it and said, this looks a lot like kubectl explain. So we thought it would be very natural to extend the command line arguments of kubectl explain to allow users to supply their own templates to format the output so that it can be in Markdown or whatever if they want to put it in the C file or Python, whatever. We also wanted to embed some templates for everyone to use that are just generally useful. One being the current output, which is human readable. We would embed a template that replicates that, and also one for Markdown. Yeah, we're here. I'm here just to propose this as an idea to extend kubectl explain to seek feedback, and hopefully someone who wants to take this under their wing and extend it with my team's help.
So I have a very tricky question. Since you are exposing an option to format the output, is there a chance that we could create a format such that it will produce a YAML file with the descriptions being comments for the fields and fields having empty values? So basically something like a generate empty, I don't know, let's say pod with all the fields filled in with their descriptions, but with empty values, so that you can then take this thing and, you know, fill in, submit it over back to the cluster.
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool idea. I'm not sure what kind of like technical problems someone might run into. Like for instance, like coming up with default values for types that might fit the cell validations. That sounds like a pretty hard problem, but
so
anyone could put in any template and format it whatever way they want is the idea.
Let me tell you a little bit of history why I'm asking about something like that. So Eddie and myself and a couple of folks, we've been discussing options for replacing create commands, the create job, create deployment, all those specific commands with a rather generic generate command. And Eddie was working on a prototype. And now that you're mentioning the topic that there could be an option for format template, I'm not saying that it has to be done right away, but I'm just wondering if that would be possible, because if then I guess there might be even more use cases for this approach. But the general idea is definitely sound.
I think someone could try to explore that. It's definitely something that I think this might support, is generating, you know, your own template of actual code. But I don't know the specifics of what problems they might run into doing that.
Yeah, there was a.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so the problem with the YAML is that generating from a template engine means that if you have any weird character that is not valid YAML, then it's going to start breaking. And there are many, many ways that you can have YAML break because of the formatting. And so I think if we wanted to generate YAML, we could do it, but we probably shouldn't do it from a template.
Yeah, that's fair. I was just going to say there was a working group API expression kept that Kevin Weissmuller opened to add examples to the OpenAPI data. OpenAPI has a actual field for example data. We're just not using it. And so that was one of the things that we were hoping to pull from for this, like, generating stuff in terms of where you get that, template data from.
Yeah, we haven't made progress on that, unfortunately. I think the challenge also is like there are way too many fields, so we don't know which fields we should expose in general. The example is a good idea, but we don't know exactly how to do that. It's not obvious yet.
To throw something out there, if we could have a -o JSON option for explain, and then have all of these template formatters as crew plugins, just to keep these things a little bit more orthogonal. I'm not sure whether that runs into the same problem that Tuan pointed out in terms of serializability versus JSON, but that might give a little more, I don't know, flexibility for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. The thing is that we already have JSON and it's called the OpenAPI.
Is there a way to do an explain get that output from kubectl, or do I have to go through to the API directly?
Yeah, I don't know what benefits we'd get, because basically we're taking the OpenAPI and almost giving it to the template engine as it is. And so technically you should be able to just plug in whatever. Yeah, if you wanted to do it in a plugin, I think you could, but I think it's better if you specify the template instead of a plugin, which is going to be complicated to implement. Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is that I think it's good if we can replace if you can change the template, but then it should be a template. Like if you want to expose things in a different way, you provide the template, probably not a plugin, which means that you have to compile something, you have to write code and whatnot. I'm not sure what the benefit would be.
But is there a way to get other than talking to the API directly from kubectl, can I get the equivalent of the API spec output in a machine readable form?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think, Nick, you were talking about something that I had commented here. Antoine, this comment specifically was, we already, you know how we have the concept of printers already for the different output types. If we already have a Go template output type, if we can extend that to work with files, does that solve your problem if we can bring the printers to using explain and not just get? I don't know how tightly coupled they are actually.
So you would want to be able to print an object, whatever object, using a markdown, the template. Yeah, I'm not sure what this means. The thing is, in general, when you do kubectl get -o template, this is a format we have, right?
Right.
When you do a kubectl get -o template, you get a object as the input of the template. In this case, you get the type information as the input of the template. And so we're one meta level above or below.
I'm not, we could talk offline about that one.
No, for sure. But yeah, if you do a kubectl get -o and you specify a template, the template receives the object that you want to print, right?
Right.
Like you're gonna receive one pod, and that's gonna print one pod. the content of the pod. Here for kubectl explain, the template receives the definition of the pod, not an instance of a pod, but the definition of the pod.
Yeah.
So they're completely different things.
I'm not following. Yeah, we could talk later on that one.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, the use case in CUI for this very case. That's why I asked about the JSON output. It'd be nice to be able to, in any kind of tool, to be able to preprint this information in a live form. So in other words, rather than generating a static document, being able to generate a UI component, for example, magic going from explain to a React component. Be nice if there were a way of doing that rather than right now we're parsing out the text, which is horrible. But I don't think.
Yeah, and so
the template
your
approach
tool
help
is
us very
using
much.
your tool's using kubectl, or is it using a plugin?
It's using a combination of kubectl and the API, most of the API, but in some cases the CLI.
Okay, let us know what you have in mind, because maybe we can work that out.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions for Alex and Antoine? Do you have next steps in mind for this? Do you want to open a POC or?
We were really hoping to find someone who would shepherd this through with our help mostly. If not, we can talk about what are the next steps. But really, we're looking for feedback and community's blessing. Make sure everything is how everyone wants it to be done.
Mache, any other thoughts?
I can give my blessings. I can't I can't promise any help, but I can give blessings.
Yeah, in terms of getting help, if things are scoped out a bit more, maybe we can try and get some contributors on it.
But in all seriousness, do you have, I don't know, something already done, or this is more in a just a document phase, and there's no actual implementation that has happened so far?
Yeah, there's a pretty basic implementation that outputs Markdown from your current kubeconfig cluster. It's just working it into the kubectl CLI would be the work that probably needs to be done, as well as updating whatever implementation kubectl explain uses to generate the Markdown, generate the OpenAPI v2 Swagger into its output, updating that to OpenAPI v3.
So how about opening a PR with whatever you have already, and then we can work out what could be the minimal option that we can have and that we could merge, and then we can work from there what's possible and how to push this forward. We can send and ask folks on the SIG CLI mailing list for how to push this forward.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks you, Mashek, and everyone.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, another option, especially projects like this that are scoped well, is something that we can try and get a outreach intern for, or the Linux Foundation might have renamed it, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's that much work, to be honest, because so we have the code. The question is, how do we get that code in kubectl? How do we have the flags? And we need the basic Markdown file template for the default output, and that's pretty much it. So if you guys want, we can totally, maybe in this document, write these steps down, maybe add some details, and we would know exactly what needs to be done. But there's not a massive amount of work to do. The tough parts has already been done.
Did this be tracked in a CAP?
we could do a cap.
Okay. Kevin, you're here, right?
Hey, yeah, I'm here.
Would you like to share your screen?
Here, if you want to just, I will link to the chat, the specific part of the KEP that is useful for this discussion. Did you see what I put in the chat?
Yes. Did I click it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably just GitHub being slow. Okay, cool.
There we go.
You can do the rich diff too. That might be easier to see.
Yeah, GitHub is being slow. Does that work?
Okay. Sure, yeah. So basically, I'm just here to update you now that the enhancements freeze is over and we've got our enhancement merged and approved for 124. What the kind of status is of the modifications to kube control validate. So if you'll remember, I'm working on server-side validation. So basically, when you do kube control validate and you send a object with unknown fields or duplicate fields that were previously getting dropped by this API server or errored out via client-side validation, that is now going to come from the server. And there's a history, if you go through kind of the KEP and the early discussions of why client-side is bad, why server-side is better, etc. And basically the big so what I had proposed last time I chatted at the beginning of this KEP cycle was that there's kind of kube control validate flag currently is a Boolean. So you either true, do the validation, false, don't do the validation. And then I had originally proposed kind of 3 domains of validate. So, the true and false for backwards compatibility, client or server, and then the strict ignore and warn specifically for server side. The feedback I got and the solution we went with is that we don't want to give people the option to do client side validation or server side validation. We want it to be intent based. So basically just tell kube control, hey, do you want the server to fail, or do you want the request to fail on invalid fields, succeed on invalid fields, or give you a warning? And so for strict validation, basically under the hood, we're going to check if server-side validation is available. If so, use that. Otherwise, defaults back to client side. And so this will have the effect of, in the long run, basically deprecating client-side validation as all servers gain access to server-side validation. There was some feedback around, client-side validation has some uses when it's not connected to a server. People like to be able to validate their objects even if they don't have access. And kind of the discussion was more along that that's not really a supported path. We don't really want to enable that, but we still can if you know that this new semantics of the validate flag will default to client side if it's not connected to a server, etc. That's kind of the status of this, and work on implementing this basically will begin in earnest in the coming week or so. And wanted to take any questions anyone had, or see if anyone is particularly interested in reviewing this code, so that I know who to tag once the PRs are up for review.
A quick question. Is the long-term plan that once the compatibility window is passed, we could actually remove the client-side validation code, or are we thinking that won't ever be possible?
Yes, that. So I think that the end goal is to remove client-side validation, And I think that the exact when that happens is, I think, a little unclear still, because I mean, there's going to be a time where no server can connect to, when no server doesn't support server-side validation, but there's also, there's always going to be the possibility of not connecting to a server at all, right? And so I think that to say when exactly we cut it off and remove server-side or client-side validation at all has been left for a later time, basically, for, I don't know, at least until after this goes GA. And then I think the plan is to basically start warning on, if you're not connected to a server at all, do a client-side validation with a warning saying, hey, this is going to be gone at this release, connect to a server if you want any validation at all, or use this external feature that does client-side validation kind of thing. But that is, that's, I guess, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, thoughts, comments? You said your ask is who to tag on PRs for review for this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start tagging people regardless, but if anybody has particular interest in seeing this, then let me know now, and I can be sure to tag you.
Kevin, I could be involved in that.
Sounds good. I'll make a note of that.
Cool, thanks, Kevin. Jeffrey Ying, you were here.
Hello. Would you be able to open the doc?
Yes.
Cool. So the basic inspiration from this came from a issue from Crossplane, where we had basically there were a lot of CRDs, and there was basically slowdown in both kubeAPI server and client side. You can actually go down to the bottom for a link to that issue. Yeah, then the additional links. Yeah, so from this issue, on the server side, we implemented lazy marshalling to sort of improve the performance of the API server when there's a lot of CRDs. This is mainly around OpenAPI and like marshalling over OpenAPI. And I think on the client side, when there's a lot of CRDs, there's still this issue that a kubectl could be pretty slow. I think we had a fix a while ago around increasing the discovery QPS. To mitigate some of that. But I think right now we want to have a discussion on long-term, what we want to do, any improvements that we want to make there. And I wanted to go over sort of, we have a new caching mechanism that we implemented for a new feature that we are working on, which is OpenAPI v3. And we think that this kind of mechanism could be extended to the discovery for kubectl. If you just go back to the doc. So with OpenAPI v3, so everyone is probably familiar with OpenAPI v2. We have this endpoint /OpenAPI/v2 that returns the aggregated spec for all the built-in type CRDs and etc. With OpenAPI v3, we sort of wanted to improve on this. And since an aggregated spec is very large, we split it up into groups, separate group versions, such that we have this, it kind of works similar to Discovery now in that we have this Discovery document that lists all the OpenAPI paths with all the groups and versions. And a client can then request, for example, in here, APIs apps v1, they can request separate OpenAPI specs for specific group version combinations. And one of the caching mechanisms that we were introducing in this release for beta is something around the idea of cache busting. So before talking about cache busting, I can talk about how things currently work. So currently we use e-tags in OpenAPI. A client would send a request to the OpenAPI. It would the OpenAPI would basically, the server would hash the output and provide an e-tag for the client, such that next time the client sends a request, it'll provide the same e-tag. And if the resource is not changed, then a 304 not modified response is returned, and we basically save the like the round trip of having the entire OpenAPI spec sent back to the client. Now, the problem with this is that with OpenAPI v3, we basically isolated the OpenAPI specs into group versions. And for clusters with a lot of CRDs, we can have the possibility of, similar to what we have with Discovery, having a lot of tiny requests for group versions, and having to basically maintain, every time we need a, let's say, invalidate cache, we need to constantly ping or just watch query the endpoints to make sure that nothing has updated. And this is quite expensive. So the new mechanism that we're trying to do is we're attaching a hash at the end of every OpenAPI, so every OpenAPI path. And this hash just indicates, it's basically the same as an e-tag, but it's provided in terms of a query parameter rather than a e-tag specifically for the HTTP client. And the benefit of this is that on the discovery page, a client can easily see which hash, provided that a client keeps track of the hashes, the client can easily see which pages are updated and which pages has basically, and that a request is not needed for them. And so obviously this is an improvement in that the client can now selectively choose whether to send requests to particular group versions, depending on what it needs. And the other benefit of this is that we have on the client Go side, we use a library called HTTP cache, which actually looks at the particular a particular path query parameters, and depending on the cache control, it will choose how to cache a particular page. But our goal with this adding this query parameter is that we want to make sure that when we have a path with a particular hash, that hash basically it never expires, or a cache will sort of have that path, and it'll have the settings cache control mutable with a very long expiry date, such that the path never expires, and subsequent requests through this HTTP cache library will basically avoid the network requests entirely and just serve pages directly from this cache. And because of that, let's say we have a discovery request. We're thinking that if we have this kind of similar mechanism for discovery, then sure, we still have a lot of requests maybe on startup, but subsequent requests to, let's say a group version is invalidated, we don't have to invalidate the entire tree. We can only a particular group version that changed or will be invalidated from this discovery document, and this was theoretically reduce the amount of requests that we sent to the Kube API server from the discovery side. And so, yeah, so that's basically what I wanted to cover. I think the next step will be just to sort of gather some feedback and see if there's anyone interested in working on this.
So as you mentioned, Jeffrey, this should be especially helpful when there's a lot of CRDs. So if you do a kube control with like a -v7, you see like this storm of discovery requests, and this new mechanism, the same that is being updated for OpenAPI, should significantly reduce that kind of discovery storm. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yes, that's our goal.
Yeah, and one consequences of this is that we can now refresh the discovery almost every single time instead of not knowing when to invalidate or using a random, an arbitrary time to keep the cache, which is frustrating when it's 10 minutes and sometimes it needs to be refreshed and we don't know it needs to be refreshed. Now we can literally refresh every time because we're not going to have many requests. And so it's going to be almost free to just make sure it's up to date.
Yeah, this sounds awesome. Very, very cool. Is there a place for folks interested to reach out to you, or are you working on this anywhere?
Probably SIG API machinery or well, this is like two parts. The Open APIs part is around API machinery, but I guess like the discovery component is around the Kubernetes CLI, which right now it's mainly the crossplane issue that we've been having this discussion. But right now, me and Antoine have been working on this.
Yeah, we have a meeting with the people from Crossplane today anyway. So reach out to us if you want to contribute, or we'll see how things go. But yeah, we have a meeting today with the people from Crossplane.
And API v3 is going to be served by this release, or it's already in alpha?
It's already in alpha and will be beta this release.
Cool. Is it behind a flag, or is it?
Yeah, it's an alpha feature, so it's behind the OpenAPI v3 flag.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Cool. Thanks for joining us, Jeffrey. Ross, locking for kube configs.
Yep, this is something that came from Mache, and it's really just to make sure that when you're doing concurrent changes to kubeconfig, whether that be whatever you're using, right, that only one process actually can write to the kubeconfig file one time. So right now it uses the lock file mechanism, which works to some extent, but it's not fully atomic. Versus if you use the native, platform-specific locking mechanism that is, atomic, and it solves some of the concurrency issues. And the one I'll say the largest issue so far that I've gotten feedback on is the introduction of a new dependency, which is etcd's file locking mechanism as a dependency into client Go. And that seems to be the only thing that had raised questions. Do we want to include that as a dependency, or do we want to essentially recreate what it does so that we don't have to pull in another dependency, that sort of thing. So it's really just kind of, figuring out from a SIG CLI perspective, which route to take.
There is another take that that I've been considering as well, and that's up for debate, is entirely dropping the functionality of locks. In OpenShift, we have that particular functionality disabled entirely. So you can run OC multiple times and it won't happen. Of course, the danger is that the last process writing will be the one winning this. But the general guidelines that we're giving to everyone is that they should not be running parallel processes against the same kubeconfig file. So there are probably a couple of options. We can maintain the current solution, which is not ideal. We can try implementing per OS solutions, which isn't super hard, or we can bring in dependencies, external dependencies, but that's where Jordan worries come in, because that basically means we will be pulling in additional depths onto pretty much every client Go consumer, because that bit of code resides in client Go.
How complex is the locking library that it's using? Is it something we can implement more rudimentary ourselves?
From what I was looking, it's the Linux implementation is as simple as a one syscall that you can do. I'm not sure how that will work on Mac, but I would assume that the syscall would be similar. The only question is what the Windows implementation looks like. That I haven't checked, and I did not get time to do.
Yeah, it's another syscall to lock file X, I think is what the name of it is. It honestly, it's not terrible. The only reason I didn't implement it, essentially how etcd did it was only because the etcd implementation has been pretty much battle tested at this point. And we know that it works. So it was one of those, do we recreate the wheel or do we just use one that we know works?
Yeah, but the biggest issue from what I understood Jordan had was basically, do we really want to pull in such a big dependency just to have a rather simple functionality? So.
And it seemed like the tree shaking that gets done didn't seem like it was going to be too bad. Getting rid of all the other stuff that we're not using, but again, I guess it's a decision for the larger group to make.
I'm personally inclined to reinvent the wheel for this one. I don't expect this to be longer than, I don't know, 10, 20 lines per OS. Given that there's 3 of them, it shouldn't be that bad.
Yeah, it's not terrible. There's a couple of implementations that I wasn't completely sure about. Like, obviously Linux is pretty solid. There's some other ones like Plan 9 and Solaris and things like that that I would not be able to test as far as I know. But even those implementations seem fairly simple.
I'm inclined to start with just simple Linux, Mac OS, and Windows, since those are the 3 major. I'm not sure if we do support kubectl on other platforms at all, but those 3 seem to be pretty simple.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's and I have this conversation with Jordan very often, especially when it comes to upgrading Cobra.
I mean, for Cobra, it's a little bit different because we're pulling in something already that's there. It's just getting bigger.
Yeah.
For this particular one, for this particular one, the issue is that bringing this dependency means every client Go consumer gets additional dependency. That's
Yeah. Yeah, this is what our dependency graph looks like for the project. So every time I look at this, I'm just like, yeah, I understand where Jordan's coming from.
true.
How do you want to make this decision then? Do you feel comfortable doing what Mache suggested?
Yeah, I can basically take what they did for etcd and turn it into a package within Client Go, and that shouldn't add any more dependencies.
Yeah.
That's totally doable. And like you said, like Linux, Mac, and Windows, those are the primary platforms. So as long as those work.
Do we need to talk about the point that Machi pointed out, Jordan mentioned on the issue that, like, do we even want the logging behavior in the first place? Does it solves a very narrow problem of logging for the write, but like usually if you have multiple processes contending over the file, that's not really going to solve the problem on the whole.
Maybe just, get rid of that mechanism, add there a warning that, oh yeah, we will just remove it soon, and then drop the mechanism entirely in, I don't know, 2-3 releases per the usual deprecation period. That's a viable option for me as well, honestly.
Honestly, I didn't even know we had the mechanism, and I wouldn't trust it if I were if I were working with this. I would be writing my own separate config file process if I needed multiple.
Exactly. That's literally what I'm telling every single customer that was complaining that, oh, we run this in parallel. I'm like, yeah, don't do it. Use separate. Even copy the file, do whatever you need to do. You have a consistent behavior and not something, well, it depends whoever got first there. Yeah, there's an option to turn the locking off already. So if someone is curious, he can turn it off easily. I think that's a global variable in the package. So
yeah, is that a breaking change that we're afraid to make though, if people are relying on that current behavior in pipelines and stuff?
If someone is relying that in their pipeline, they're super brave. It's not a sarcasm. It's like you're men of steel and whatever you want to call it. It's just, I have so much respect to you if you do so with multiple processes running at once. But in all honesty, I think just announcing that we are considering that change, maybe an email to SIG CLI and Kate's dev with a PR. I'm not sure if we can actually, because that's part of the library, so we can't put it in Client Go, but we can put it in kubectl as a warning there, and then just we'll drop it eventually in 3 releases, unless someone will complain on that thread.
Where would the warning be emitted exactly? Surely we would want to emit that on every write, as most of the time people don't care. And as you were saying before, this isn't actually very useful.
Yeah,
It'd be a lot of noise.
That's something that I realized the moment I said that we will be emitting warning. So maybe just an email and a deprecation information in the file, so that people who are using this.
Maybe email to KDev even to.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's what I would prefer to see, since it seems like this is causing problems and is not really that helpful. Like improving it would solve some of the problems, but if it's not, like it's just encouraging people to do things that like they're still not safe despite this feature existing. I'd rather see it go. But like between nothing happening and this PR with the no dependencies going in, I would still prefer that because it does solve the bugs regarding
True.
file to
So
launch.
maybe just send out an email and let's wait for the overall response. We can always put that in the Twitter sphere and other social medias and see what the response will be. And
Russ,
yeah,
are you
that's
comfortable with that?
in that PR that Jordan, Eddie had a minute ago up, where I put the opt-out option is where the desire came from. I just found it recently going through tons of different of my notes. Russ, do you want to try sending out an email asking for feedback about whether people would prefer a locking mechanism that will be written from scratch, or they feel okay with entirely removing this functionality, and we can gather feedback on both SIG CLI and KDEV.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, Jordan seems in favor of getting rid of it on this PR, so he's the one I was afraid of us having to sell.
I mean, if you look at and you had it open a minute ago, the other PR where he was like, I don't feel safe. Yeah, just that one. And I'm like, maybe something has changed over there the past 18 months since that was initially brought up, which I'm totally in favor of. We just probably need to warn everyone that this will happen, and just, I'll send one of my golden thoughts out later today to always use separate kubectconfigs for your processes. Sometimes those advices help.
And Ross, if you can easily get together a list of every command that currently uses this locking behavior, that might help too.
I mean, that's pretty easily to identify because it would be mostly valuable for write operations.
Yeah.
Because that in the read situation, that shouldn't be such a big issue.
Yeah, it's mostly just like login, I think.
So probably just a config and the subcommands, because none of the other commands in kubectl that we have is modifying the kubectconfig, or should not be.
Yeah, and this changes in client Go, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wonder if anyone in the community is going to be dependent on this behavior if they're using client Go, but you can find out.
Hence the request to the KDEV,
Yeah.
just to get the necessary commitment. Also, we'll put a warning in the docs or that it is deprecated, and then with the sufficient time, people should be able to react.
Cool. All right, that sounds good. We can take this off for now. I'll talk to you about that one. Nick, you want to go through your stand-up?
Sure, can be super quick. So at long last, there's a lot of Electron issues under the covers. We couldn't sign and notarize the macOS builds of CUI for the longest time. There's bugs are still there, but there's some workarounds. And so I decided to just finally do that and stop waiting for them to get their fixes in place. So macOS build signed and notarized. Lots of bug fixes flowing through. I'm not going to bore you with the details there. The other thing you can check out, some links there. We like your feedback on this. I think there's some excellent opportunities there So CUI's had some notebook support for a while now. It's sort of just been in a prototype kind of phase. We push it to the next level. Ability to parse and render Markdown into kind of guided documentation. So the Knative documentation maybe has more interesting examples, although, yeah, I think this should be okay. So anyway, so the idea is that we can guide people through a series of complex tasks. This is all just running on top of CUI. The code blocks, this is all on a static website, but if you're running in CUI on your laptop, these code blocks would be executable. There would be progress metrics towards goals. I think to me, the most interesting opportunity that we can explore here is the customize integration with this. I think one of the really fascinating aspects to me of guiding people through Kubernetes solutions, not only is there a complex story in terms of getting prereqs, running the prereq tools to get the next tools, using those tools to establish solutions and all that. There's a complex arc to most documentation that we can guide people through. But I think most of those solutions are going to be customizable. And so I think there'll be some interesting opportunities to see how we can make that notion of customizable guided solutions. Anyway, so if you want to brainstorm at some point with that, let me know. That's all I got.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Any other stand-ups? Awesome. And we are done right on time. So thanks, everyone. We had some great presentations and things to think through today. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Eddie.